Okay, everybody, I'm Taylor Sharpe. This is the FileMaker Pro user group in Dallas, Texas. We're glad to have everybody here that's here in person and a few of you online virtually. So welcome. It is June, kind of summer type things are kicking off. If you're into the conference things, if you want to sign up for Elevate FM, you're late. It's going on right now up in Toronto. In fact, I think Heather's presenting right now. Other conferences this summer, if you're looking for a summer conference with FileMaker topic, we've got Full Access coming up August 6th to 10th. That's going to be out Los Altos, which basically, for those of us from Texas, just means somewhere near San Francisco. It'll be the same place last year. This is a small conference, probably 50, 75 people, but a number of the Claris people will be there. Good opportunity to meet some of the engineers there, like Rick Kalman, Clay Makel. Ryan showed up last year, so if you're looking for a conference to go to, that's a definite possibility. There is no Claris conference this year, big developer conference like we've had in the past, but there will be next year. And it is supposed to be a destination event like we've done in the past. So looking forward to that. I'm betting on it being in Nashville, but I have no inside information on that. It was just where the last one was that they canceled. Regarding FileMaker versions, last month or so, 22.0.6 of the server came out that updated security issues. So if you've got some that were on the National Securities Vulnerabilities Database thing, so if you're got a FileMaker 22 server, make sure you get that updated. There is also an update of FileMaker Pro that just fixed some features. This is the time of year that we're not supposed to talk about a next version coming out until it's out, but since Ryan McCann, President, CEO of Claris, has put a notice or letter out to everybody about some of the direction, including AI and stuff like that, he's also said that the new version will be out very soon. I'm imagining that will be in a few weeks. The only thing that I know that has been said publicly about it is there will be a remote and a standby server for those who want that as an option from Claris, but there are certainly many other ways to do those kind of things, but those will be part of the topics. However, but for next month, we are going to do a change. We had Martha was going to come in from Claris and she's not able to come in. So we're going to switch gears. Paul and the Harmonic team here, Paul Mitchell, are going to give us a presentation on the new version of FileMaker. Hopefully it will be out by then, so otherwise it'll be an interesting presentation. But anyway, so assuming it'll be out then, you certainly want to come and hear all the latest features from one of the platinum partners that's really been in on the testing of the new version. So certainly plan on coming. It will not be that first week of July. It's going to be the second Friday of July, which I think is July 10th. Because of 4th of July weekend, we're moving it back a date. So it won't be the first Friday. It'll be the second Friday of the month next month. So plan on being here for that. Okay, up next, we have Mike Linett and the Zerowait team. And since Claris has brought up the subject of backups and remote servers and things like that, I bet Mike has something to tell us about that. So Mike, come on up.
Hi, FileMaker folks. Claris has made some interesting announcements recently. It looks like FileMaker 2026 will provide native disaster recovery, remote backups, and standby servers. The whole resiliency package that will fit perfectly with Zerowait's simple store architecture for FileMaker. We're building for agentic AI, and with increased productivity, the infrastructure that enterprise run on to support FileMaker will need a robust server architecture that doesn't fold like a cheap lawn chair when things get real. While new things are always exciting, here's the part they don't say out loud. All that power needs a home that won't nickel and dime you like the cloud, that won't lock you in and won't crumble under a real enterprise load. That's why you should check out Zerowait's Simple Store Server, networking, and Proxmox solutions. Purpose-built Simple Store hardware running Proxmox with ZFS, high-performance NVMe support, live migration, snapshots, replication, the works. It's a disaggregated design so that no single piece can take everything down. FileMaker performance screams 3 times faster in our real-time production environment. On-prem control, predictable costs, no surprise bills, giving you full sovereignty for your data while you ride the AI wave Claris is unleashing. Claris is giving you the rocket, Zerowait gives you the launch pad. The works. Don't wait for the next outage to see why. Go look at Simple Converge today. You'll thank me later.
I'd like to introduce Matt Monroe.
So yeah, we're going to talk about OData. I was trying to figure out how to impress upon everybody importance of OData and its place in the constellation of FileMaker tech. And so I thought OData or die, or OData or diet, as it looks on the other one. But they seem like the same thing to me, so either way you want to read it. Let's get going. Welcome to FMPug June and our friendly discussion about how you would just better adopt OData or face extinction. My name is Matthew Monroe, one of the owners here at Harmonic, and specifically I've been in charge of the technologies we use to integrate other systems with our FileMaker solutions. And next to me is the one and only Brian Hamm. All right, this is a super large topic, and given the size of the body of information that we could traverse over, we're already short on time. But here's a bird's eye view of what we're gonna talk about. First, what is OData? Like exactly where did it come from and what does it do for me? Next, I want to cover the so what, why do I care topic. So my hope is to convince you to look into this protocol and maybe even start orienting your FileMaker solutions to be OData ready. Finally, Brian is going to walk you through a whole giant pile of how. We don't want to spend all of our time on the theoretical, but the how without the why can be kind of dry. Our intention is not to present a detailed how-to, but to leave you with a desire to learn more about and to implement these technologies and to give you a glimpse into the tools that you will need in your tool belt to do so. Let's jump in and get the what out of the way. We're going to quickly cover where OData came from, what are its core purposes. I'm going to double click on a couple of them to understand the implications, and I would like to provide a summary of how it fits into the FileMaker constellation from Harmonic's point of view. OData, the Open Data Protocol, is an open standard, ISO, IEC approved, and OASIS standard, for building and consuming queryable, interoperable RESTful APIs in a consistent way. It was originally developed by Microsoft and is now a widely adopted protocol that helps developers focus on business logic rather than reinventing conventions for requests and responses and queries, etc. Is OData just yet another connection protocol? What is the core purpose of OData, especially contrasted with the other protocols like ODBC, JDBC, etc.? OData provides a uniform way to perform CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. Also support advanced querying, filtering, sorting, paging, expanding relationships. It exposes data models over the web, that's a key. Enables easy discovery and consumption of data services via the machine-readable metadata document, also key. It builds directly on REST principles, but it adds standardized rules, making APIs more predictable and tool-friendly compared to custom REST APIs. Let's double-click on expose data models over the web. This refers to the core capability of making your actual data structure, tables, fields, relationships, accessible and operable over HTTP REST. In Claire's products, this means FileMaker Server or FileMaker Cloud turns your FileMaker tables into OData entity sets that external clients can directly query, create, update, or delete using standard OData URLs. It's very much like the API endpoint that you didn't have to build, but that you got built for you with all of your FileMaker security rules in place. Practical example, let's say you had a FileMaker table named contacts. That, when you turn OData on, becomes accessible at that endpoint. Your server, FMI OData v4, your database name /contacts. You can then run queries directly against that endpoint, like this get query, where we're going to try to ask the contacts table, filter it for active, we're going to order it by a last name, and we want the top 50. Didn't have to build that API, got built for you. All right, I also want to double click on the enable easy discovery and consumption of data services. This is the specific mechanism expressed with the $metadata endpoint that makes the exposed model self-describing and easy for tools to developers to understand automatically. So when you enable OData on FileMaker Server, the server automatically generates a full entity data model description. So here's a Claris example. We could do a GET call on a database of our choice, and we see our server, FMI, OData v4, your database, $metadata. This is going to return an XML document describing all of the available entity sets, your FileMaker tables. entity types, the structure of each table, the properties, fields and their data types, navigation properties, which is the relationships between tables, and supported operations. Just gives you that information. So to summarize, these 2 points, in my opinion, are the central ideas behind OData. This means that OData takes the structure, schema of your data, the entities, properties, relationships, data types, constraints, and makes that entire model publicly accessible and queryable using standard web technologies, HTTP plus URLs. Instead of just giving you raw data, OData gives you a machine-readable description of what the OData looks like and how you can interact with it. OData uses an entity data model, EDM, which is conceptually similar to a database schema or an object model in your code. OData doesn't just expose data, it exposes the blueprint of your data model over the web in a standardized, consistent way. This leads me to conclude that OData provides a standardized, self-describing queryable REST interface that many older connection methods, ODBC, JDBC, custom web publishing with XML or PHP, or even some direct data API usage, these things all handle this in a more fragmented and proprietary way. So in Claris products, enabling OData on FileMaker server with the FMOData extended privilege exposes your tables as entity sets with full metadata. This reduces the need to build and install custom ODBC, JDBC drivers and configure the firewall appropriately, because most people have 443 kind of open already. Handwritten XML, web publishing, or PHP endpoints. And it also reduces the need for multiple separate APIs for different clients. Let's take a peek at this Claris OData example using the following query. We are going to aim our query here at an invoices table. And using this URL string, we're going to filter this based on open invoices with an amount over 5,000. And we're going to order it in a certain way by invoice date. We're going to show the top 25. And we're going to expand this to include related data in our invoices line table, all in one URL. It's one consistent endpoint with a rich query language, and it replaces many custom scripts or older web publishing setup. It can even create or mimic table relationships that you didn't build. More on that later. So I'm not saying that non-OData integration options are obsolete, not yet. But things are strongly and swiftly shifting in favor of OData. Claris continues to improve OData with better container handling, aggregates, casting, parameterization, and webhooks in 2025 plus releases, positioning this as their modern standard. For those of you who are interested in our pre-session survey and how it is going, let's just jump over and take a look. Of all of the various integration protocols available for FileMaker, which you're primarily using? Well, most people are in FM data API land, and that was a standard for quite a long time. We have some OData usage, but we also have some ODBC, JDBC, and some legacy still taking up a big chunk of that pie. So interesting. I hope that we can tempt you to expand on that OData and replace maybe some of the older ones. All right, before I bore the what out of you, let's jump ship and move on to the why. If you don't use OData, why switch? If you dabble in OData, why do more OData? Let me tempt you into diving into this protocol if you haven't done so already. So here I want to cover FileMaker to FileMaker implications of OData. I want to take a look at external systems to FileMaker integrations and the implications that OData has for you. And I want to also look at making your system more AI ready. FileMaker to FileMaker integrations. How I might improve my current FileMaker recipe by adding some of that tasty OData spice. Okay, creating temporary tables on the fly in Claris FileMaker is uncommon in traditional development because FileMaker favors a stable schema with predefined tables, relationships, and table occurrences. However, there are some valid scenarios where dynamic table creation or temp table patterns become useful, especially when leveraging OData capabilities in Claris products like FileMaker Pro, Server, Claris Studio, and Claris MCP. Trust me, there are many, many other developers and alternate DB platforms that jump to creating on-the-fly scratch tables or session tables instead of moving data into variables or putting the data into virtual lists. OData makes it possible to, say, perform a cross-join, create a temp table, store the results in the temp table. And then when you're done with querying that temp table and using it, maybe clean up after yourself and delete the table. Here's some practical use cases framed around Claris FileMaker plus OData. So, staging imported or external data. We could import complex data from CSVs, APIs, or external OData sources into a temporary staging table for validation, or cleaning, or transformation before moving to production tables. OData angle here, external clients like Claris Studio, Power BI, or custom apps can push data via OData, which lands in a dynamically created temp table. Scripts then process and merge it. Benefits, you protect your main schema from bad imports, common in ETL-like processes. Also, complex reporting and ad hoc analysis. You can materialize intermediate results from complex finds, external like execute SQL, or join data that doesn't neatly fit into existing relationships. OData research example here, we could use OData query to aggregate data from multiple tables, then post results into a temp table for further client-side consumption, like a Claris Studio visualization. Also, user-specific or session-based data isolation. All right, here we create a per user temp table for standard sandboxed calculations, simulations, or multiple step wizards where data shouldn't pollute shared tables. Useful in multi-tenant or collaborative Claris Studio apps. Brian and I were also talking about shopping cart kind of technology where you might want to store sessions in an isolated table and potentially delete when they're abandoned. All right, 3 more here. Dynamic schema for integrations and add-ons. When integrating with external systems via OData, you might need to runtime tables that match incoming payloads. So, Claris MCP and FileMaker server scripting can trigger OData calls to create and delete these tables as part of integration workflows. Or testing, prototyping, or one-off migrations. Developers used temp tables during data migrations or when testing new structures without altering the live schema. With OData, external tools can just automate this. Also, finally, performance optimizations for heavy operations. Copy subsets of large data sets into temp tables for faster local processing, sorting, or exporting, allowing slow relationships or unstored calculations on production tables. Boy, we get hit with that a lot. There are plenty of other FileMaker reasons to utilize OData. I just think that the schema manipulation is one of the most compelling. It is also something that those of us from non-FileMaker backgrounds haven't really been able to do in FileMaker very easily until recently. External systems to FileMaker implications. In this section, we're going to explore the connecting of some external systems to a FileMaker solution using Apache Kafka. Of course, hooking up an external system service directly into your FileMaker solution is possible, but perhaps not always preferable. Think of performance concerns. So perhaps having an external system with a service connect to a live, heavily curated copy of your system maybe is a better tact. Apache Kafka excels at durable, scalable event streaming, making it a strong choice for live syncing changes out of FileMaker into SQL databases or other targets. So why this approach works well? Kafka's design supports change data capture patterns. Capture inserts, updates, and deletes as events, then reliably deliver them to consumers. Think a SQL sync. This provides exactly once semantics, fault tolerance via replication, and decoupling. FileMaker doesn't need to know about downstream systems. Claris FileMaker specifics here. FileMaker Pro Server lacks a built-in Kafka connector. Common bridges include OData API, enhanced in recent versions, webhooks, especially in FileMaker Server 22+, scripts triggered on recent record changes or middleware like Claris Connect or N8N. OData serves as an excellent query update layer for extraction. Claris FileMaker Server exposes tables via OData 4.01 with improvements in casting, parameterization, nesting, and webhooks. You can poll OData endpoints or use change notifications to feed Kafka producers. Webhooks on data schema changes, which are OData aware, can trigger payloads to a Kafka producer service, enabling near real-time event publishing. So tools like N8N or custom Node.js or Python services can consume OData webhooks and publish to Kafka topics. This setup achieves low overhead for moderate to high change volumes because Kafka handles the heavy lifting of queuing, replay, and distribution. It's more resilient than direct API polling or file exports. Here are some relevant use cases in a Claris ecosystem. Here are some scenarios where Kafka plus FileMaker plus OData make strong sense aligned with Claris Studio, MCP, and server strengths. Public data exposure, separation of concerns. You can sync sensitive FileMaker records via OData filtered views to a public SQL Postgres instance behind a web app. Kafka ensures only applied fields flow outward. OData example here. I use FileMaker Server OData to expose a read-only public customers table. Filter by status active. A webhook can, on changes, publishes events to Kafka, SQL, and it syncs. Claris Studio can then consume the public SQL data for external forms or dashboards. High performance analytics and reporting. You can replicate transactional data from FileMaker, good for business logic, to a columnar SQL warehouse optimized for queries. Kafka streams your changes for near real-time BI. So a Claris tie-in here might be combined with Claris MCP for AI-driven insights on the replicated data, or Claris Studio for live dashboard feed from the SQL side. Multi-system synchronization. Think ERP or CRM applications here. Push FileMaker inventory or sales updates to Kafka to external systems. Resilient replay handles outages. OData research example here would be FileMaker OData supports batch updates and deep filtering. Scripts and connect flows detect changes and route to Kafka topics partitioned by entity, like FM invoices topic. Next to last, event-driven architecture with Claris Studio. So FileMaker acts as the system of record. Kafka distributes events to Studio apps, microservices, or search indexes. Studio's Mongo-based scalability complements this for public-facing apps. And finally, my favorite topic, audits, compliance, or historical logging. Wouldn't it be nice to stream all the changes and capture events to Kafka-backed immutable store or SQL for auditing while keeping FileMaker lean? My goodness, log tables can make a FileMaker system so big and make the backup times increase. And just, oh my gosh, like I'd love to get that stuff out of FileMaker. So, for a demo later today, which Brian will show you, we took 3 primary tables from our demo database in our demo and created webhooks for them. These webhooks feed this Kafka topic, which in turn is consumed by a MySQL database we have running on-prem. This is all on-prem. Thanks to Anthony for getting this set up for us. What you see there is just a quick screenshot from our Kafka setup page that we didn't have to build out. It just built out dynamically because of the tool that we used that used OData. So pretty cool demo that we got running in the background as we're going through these demos that Brian will show us later on. Okay. In this final section, I would like to explore one of the ways to make your FileMaker system more AI ready. In this case, more AI ready means hooking it up to a local MCP server to allow a local LLM to have access to your system and your data in order to win friends and influence people. A couple of months ago, we did an FMPug session on the new Claris MCP product. And as we pointed out then, utilizing this new Claris product requires you to enable OData and the FileMaker Data API. It also requires you to open up your database to traffic from the internet, which is not an option for some. Remember too that one of the primary compliments I had for the Claris MCP product was how much of the setup work it does for you. It uses the OData metadata feature to discover the tables and scripts that you might want to expose and make available to their MCP server for discovery and introspection. So setting up a vanilla MCP server against a FileMaker built solution could be a very manual process, whereby you would manually do the system discovery and introspection. How many tables do you have that you want to be included in your MCP solution? How many scripts and what are their parameters? Not likely, but you may want to include some UI layouts that could be brought to bear in an MCP solution. And security, if not already established, can be a high effort ordeal. So this could be a very manual process, whereby what you are laboring to produce is a JSON file that the MCP server will use to establish communications with the target system. Think about typing that thing out. That's just the top. It goes on for a mile. Using an OData-aware MCP server and an OData-aware FileMaker system hosted on a modern version of FileMaker server, you can utilize dynamic discovery and introspection and pull much of this data, making the effort of having your system be AI ready much, much easier. If you have an established system, then the security parameters might already be set up, and thus that would be a low effort item. I'm going to be asking Brian to provide us with a little bit of a demo of this in the next section. All right, survey results for the why. If you have started using OData in your FileMaker solutions, what is your primary reason why? Claris is pushing it, seems to be a big piece of that pie. But some people like the powerful querying capabilities. Third-party tool compatibility is one of my favorites. I'm probably that 9%. Schema management is also on the board here, but there's a lot of people that don't yet. So hopefully when Brian is done, we can see that change. All right, I have queued up a lot of the concepts. I've tried to make a case for utilizing OData more heavily in your FileMaker solution, so I would like to pivot this conversation over to the how portion of this pug and then quickly run away and abandon Brian to do all of the hard work. So without further ado, here is Mr. Brian Hamm.
All right. You said parameterization in a presentation. So
I did. I mean, twice.
Double kudos for that. All right. Hope you like to look at demos for real, live demos, because you picked the right session if that's the case. I'm going to speed run this slide deck, and then we're going to see everything up close and personal using an old, now dormant system that I built for Art Conspiracy. It's a nonprofit that I belonged to here in Dallas through the 2010s. We had huge art events with bands, food trucks. We auctioned off about $500,000 of art over those years. I built an iOS Swift app for our attendees, and all of it ran off of FileMaker, Swift, and CloudKit. It was pretty great. COVID brought an end to that event, but the database survives, so you'll get to see a little bit of that. So here's a little bit of what we're going to cover today in no particular order. If you were here with us last time, there was an intro session. We talked about the core building blocks that you would use to write like vanilla OData requests, focusing on basic parameters like select and filter. Toward the end of that, I teased a more advanced example of a cross join. Today, I'm going to demo some advanced OData operations, including a cross join. I'll show you how to create a batch operation, how to get and set a container, and even how to programmatically create and delete a table. Spooky. So like last time, this is not an exhaustive list. First one is metadata. Matt touched on some of this a moment ago. This is what you use to get to know a system. Maybe that means it's a third-party solution you're connecting to and you need to get to know it, or maybe it's one of your own that you just forgot how to use. But you probably don't want metadata for the entire system in the response all at once. So you can now zero in on a particular table. In newer versions of OData, you can append $metadata with a hash table name. But in order for that to work, the hash needs to be encoded as %23, so URL encoding. So make sure you do that. As far as content types, you should really be familiar with 4 of these in particular. JSON, we all know and love. OData can also return XML, which can come in pretty handy, or even HTML. If you want to do batch operations, you'll also need to be familiar with a type called multi-part mixed. We'll see a batch a little later. Speaking of headers, another useful one is prefer. Prefer lets you modify how certain values are returned. So for instance, you could change date formats. Dates are one of the probably the most annoying things about APIs. And this is FileMaker though, not Python or Swift or whatever, so you can't go crazy with date formatter strings here and get anything you want, but prefer does give you some control over the timestamps. You can also have your table, field, and script names returned as a stable numeric identifier. If you've ever used a get field name in an execute SQL statement, identifiers are kind of like that. And then there's return minimal is a prefer header that responds with just the response headers. So if you don't want the record data, you're not interested, you just want to know that it worked. Cross joins and expands. This is what I teased the last time we were here, if some of you were here, or probably many of you were here. So a cross join returns data for the parent record and any child records. The relationship gets defined right in the request. You can even use a different predicate than what's on the graph, which is cool. You can even join TOs that aren't connected at all if you want. So as a reminder, expand just acts as a container, sort of a wrapper for one or more select statements. It's a good way to think about that. There's also an alternate way to fetch child records without a cross join. Maybe you're on an artist detail view and you just want to fetch the related event data. So if all you want are the child records, you can effectively write out that relationship path in the URL. The syntax for that might look like parent record / join table / child table. Containers are pretty easy. After the table and record ID, you just put a /, the name of your container field, and $value. That's not a variable, literally $value. You can also set a container, or rather you can set a text field and then use a calc container to decode it. That's a simple post request, like setting any field really, where your @$data would look like the name of your container field and then the base 64 encoded string of the image. Apply is a more recent addition to Claris's implementation of OData. You can think of apply kind of like expand. It's sort of a container or wrapper around one or more functions in this case, like filter, group by, doing sums, averages, or casting to different types. Scripts with OData, you can call those with or without a parameter. You fire a script with a post request, it's the name of your database, /script, dot, and then the name of your script. If you do have a parameter, assign that to the script parameter value. And that's not a placeholder, that's the key. You need to use that particular key. If you want to perform several operations together or want to create transactions, batch is your friend, sort of. It's like a rescue dog. He's temperamental, he bites you sometimes, but you just sort of deal with it, right? You'll understand a little more about what I mean later. The tricky part about batches is creating a valid payload. This is exceptionally easy to get wrong. Multi-part mixed relies on boundary tags and white space. Very, very specific kinds of white space. I'll show you a FileMaker calc that I wrote a little later that will make that a bit easier. This is an internal system level FileMaker table. It's not on your graph. Some of you may have used this with ODBC or in an execute SQL statement. Among other things, it contains information about your base tables. In OData, we're not really concerned so much with table occurrences as we are with base tables. So we talk to the FileMaker _tables object to do CRUD operations. Yes, you can add, update, and delete schema with an API call. And that's super useful, but it goes without saying that you really need to be careful. Great power and great responsibility and stuff. So this is an API call, which means it's going to fire immediately. There's no are you sure, there's no undo, at least with deletes anyway, there's not. Then, so extended privileges are going to be pretty important here. Make sure you're allowing the right people to do the right things, not destroy tables. So CRUD operations can be fired from outside, like a shopping cart, something ephemeral, something that might get discarded or just no need to keep it around. You can also make calls internally, the file with insert from URL, in places where you might have gone through the hassle of creating a virtual table. Almost done with these slides. We already have webhooks in Claris Connect, but OData-driven webhooks are the new hotness. You can create, invoke, and delete those with the API. The JSON definition for the webhook has a select and probably a filter, just like an OData call, because it is. OData is pretty much everywhere now. It's not on our survey graph, but it's also in MCP. Anthony spun up an MCP server and a Libra chat client for us. Thank you, sir. So we've added a single script to that MCP server and exposed it as a tool call. That script accepts a JSON parameter from the chat, does some script stuff, and exits with a script result, which is also JSON. That JSON result gets passed back to the model. Because of this, you should make an effort to avoid naming your tables, fields, and scripts with symbols or other weird abbreviations. $ZZ_G. Don't do that. Don't give your model a hard time trying to infer your schema. Be explicit. All right, I'm going to dispense with the slides, and we have a lot of demos. I'm going to use Rapid API to do this. You might like Postman. There's one called Bruno. There's an Insomnia. There's other apps probably. I like Rapid API. You do you. We'll see some fairly complex requests in the demo. If the syntax seems overwhelming, just remember this guy from our previous session. We're just connecting parameters, man. So the ugliest query string you've ever seen is simply chaining smaller statements together. That's it. This is Rapid API. If you use Postman or something like it, you should be pretty much at home here. We've got the requests we're going to run through, and we've got a section for our request headers, any parameters when those are appropriate, and then any bodies that are appropriate. I'll zoom in periodically so you can read this a little bit. The first thing I want to do is I want to do a request just to sort of a basic metadata request. This will return a list of your table names. And that's it. No other metadata. So if you don't include the metadata parameter at the end of your URL, you'll just get back a list of your tables, which seems kind of boring, except that these are navigable, these links. So this is part of the sort of self-discoverability of OData. So for instance, this first table is a zip code lookup table in the ArcCon database, and it's got a URL. And if I click that URL, I can drill into the record data for the zip code table, which is kind of nice, right? So that works with throughout these responses. You'll see that a lot. You can go to a particular record. You can go to an entire table of records if you want. And then you've got your back button. So it's a little bit like a browser that way. A metadata call, an actual metadata call, where you put metadata in the URL, it needs to be followed with a %23 because hashes don't work in URLs this way with OData. And then you just provide it with the table that you want to interrogate. So we're going to look at the artist table. No parameters, no body or anything like that here. So this is the artist table metadata. Looks like it starts with, these are just alphabetical, but this happens to start with a bunch of value lists. The kind is enum type. Enums are in all kinds of other languages, so these are just value lists. That's the way OData returns a value list. There's a bunch of value lists, and then we get down to, at some point, we get down to fields. There we go. So this is the table. This is the stable identifier I was mentioning earlier. So for a table, that is FMTID for table ID. The key object here is an array. It's not an object like the other ones. What that means is that anything in your FileMaker database that you have flagged as unique in the field options will be available here as a key. It doesn't have to be the primary key. It can be anything that's been marked unique. So sometimes you'll see multiple things to pick from there. You can pass those in with your requests. And then the field IDs also have stable identifiers. That's FMFID. Your comments now, which is a sort of a newer feature of OData on the Claris side. If you've got field and table comments, those will now appear in the response, which is going to be useful for things like machine learning and LLMs. So that's what I wanted to show you about a metadata call. I'm just going to do a top 5 select of artist records here. I mean, this is the same. I won't zoom in every single time, but we're just going to talk to the artist table. And I've got some prefer headers here that I'm going to show you how to use those. I'm going to actually turn that one off. So a basic select from the artist table for the top 5 records. These are grouped by, or ordered rather, they're ordered by the number of events that an artist has participated in, descending. So I returned the UUID for the artist, the name, how many events they participated in. for Archon events, and then you get a modification stamp. If you've done API calls, a lot of you probably have for other systems, this looks pretty familiar, right? You get your TZ sort of syntax for a timestamp. And sometimes that's what you want, or you've already got code in place to kind of handle that gracefully. But if you go back, to your headers and you turn on the prefer header and you use FMOData.gmt offset, and I'm going to rerun the same request. Now, this looks almost the same, right? But we've got a T separating the date and the time, but now we don't have a Zulu time. We've got an offset. So that's also very, very common for API responses. So you don't have to cast it or modify the result. You can just use a prefer header. There's also a prefer header called basic timestamp, which this looks a little more FileMaker-y, right? We've got our date separated time with the space, and we've got no offset or anything like that. So that's a little closer to what we're used to working with FileMaker, but you've got a handful of options, right, to just at least sort of massage the date appearance, how it comes back in the result. Getting a record by ID, this is pretty basic. Probably could have covered this in the intro, but there's one thing I want to point out here. I'm fetching this is my artist record. I'm just going to do the fetch as is. I'm asking for the UUID, the name, the row ID, and the row mod ID. So I'm just going to call this fetch my artist record, and I get back what I expect. The row ID and mod ID are sort of internal values. These are not in your schema. They're not in managed database or anything like that. But they're part of the OData response, and they're always uppercase, always uppercase. Row ID is the record ID, which we are used to. That is in FileMaker. It's a function. The row ID is how that's presented in OData. The row mod ID is the modification count. Seems kind of obvious. My artist record has been modified 1,200 times because I test it relentlessly on all sorts of things. The row mod ID, though, is important. That's why I wanted to point out this request, because if you have users out in the field, maybe they're on iPads, maybe they're on laptops, and they're connecting cellular, they need to sync back and forth, stuff needs to work offline. It's really, really important that when you fetch data that you can consider it fresh. You don't want somebody to fetch record data 2 hours earlier when they started a shift, and then they go edit that record, and then they go try to push their changes back. Maybe the record on the host has changed since then. And so you don't want data collisions like that, or data integrity problems. And so it's important for those use cases to elect to use this row mod ID. That's how you would check before you do a write that the data is in fact fresh. A cross join, we just gave you a screenshot of this the last time, but this is going to be a real call. There we go. So this starts out with what table am I sort of a context of sorts. Where am I starting from? And then I want to join the artist table and the event artist table. It's a join table in this case. And so let me show you real quick back on, this is the FileMaker Archon database. So in the schema, this is the artist table here. And what I want is to cross-join data from the event artist join table. So what does that relationship look like? Well, that's pretty straightforward. Primary key to foreign key, that's it. Just keys. What I'm going to do in here, in my filter parameter, I am doing the primary key to foreign key part of that filter, but I'm also adding another predicate to only fetch records where the name contains me. Okay, so that predicate's not on the graph. It's not in the relationship. I'm just making it up in the request, which is very cool. You don't need to clutter your graph with all this stuff like you do for like the data API. In my expand, remember expands are sort of just a wrapper for multiple select statements. So from the artist table, I have a select for the name. In the join table, I have a select for the name of the piece of art, the medium, and then just row ID, just to kind of reiterate that. And I'm just returning the top 3 of those. And so we get back a nice flat, very, very flat JSON response. If you've done anything like this in the data API, you would be looking at 4 or 5 layers deep of nested JSON for things like portals and just record metadata and everything. And it's just a lot to deal with on the receiving end, because eventually you have to parse that and do something with it, right? So when you do a cross join in OData, you get this nice flat response. Name is from the artist table, title and medium is from that join table, as is the row ID. So bespoke filters are pretty cool in OData. There's also an alternative way of fetching related data without doing a cross join. That looks like, you saw that it's sort of on when I was speed running slides earlier. This request is fetching my artist record, but I want to look across, actually all the way through the join table this time, and I want to return only the event records now. And I am doing just the top 3 to keep the response sort of small. So here, what I get back, I wasn't interested maybe in any of the artist record data at all. Maybe I already fetched it, and I'm on an artist detail layout already. So now the value array is just event records. Nothing about the join, nothing about the artist. So I've got my 3 artist records, or my 3 event records rather, locations, dates and times, and such. Containers. Containers are pretty easy. Getting a container is super easy. This is where you do this is for my artist record again. The name of the container field is what you need to put after that. And then, of course, $value. And there's no parameters necessary. And that's my container from my artist record, which is right there, this guy. Setting containers, not much more difficult than getting them. Same thing, same artist record. In this case, we're setting it though, so we need a payload. So what you need to do then is just like what you're probably used to doing already, is you base 64 encode your image, and then you pass in the name of the container field, or the text field in this case, where you want to write that. And so let's do that. This is a big, ugly response of stuff. This is what you passed in, and now you're getting it back again, along with your HTTP headers. So one of the things I want to point out about setting a container, it's also another prefer header option. If we go back to, because we certainly don't want the stuff we just gave the database all back. That's just ridiculous. It's way too much, very, very wasteful. So if we go back to our headers, I've got this prefer return minimal. And if I turn that on and fire that same request, I just want to know it worked. I don't need the whole thing back. So that's very, very handy, the return minimal, and especially with respect to container images. Scripts are easy to fire. It's just a simple post. You have the name of your database / script dot, and then the name of your script. This is the greeting script. Because it's a post, you need a body, you need the payload. So I am just going to set this, I'm going to pass this rather, the string to, I'm going to assign it to the script parameter value key, which is again not optional. That's the key you need to use to do this. So this is the value that I'm going to pass to the script. That script in FileMaker looks like not much. Get the script parameter, go to the artist layout, and then set the artist statement field with whatever that parameter, whatever that payload was. So let's go ahead and run this. And this looks more like a data API response if you're used to those. You get a code 0, which is enough, right? We just want to know it worked. So we have updated we've updated our artist statement with the birds aren't real. So from a payload, from a script. Now we're going to update the artist statement with just a regular post. So in that case, I'm going to also use the prefer minimal again. Are you all seeing that? I'm seeing. It's frozen. There it is. I'm also going to use the prefer return minimal again in this case because I don't want the entire record back because that record's going to include the headshot image, which I've already set and I don't want all that nonsense. So no parameters here, but I do need to pass in the artist statement, the name of the field that I want to set. And so I'm going to just update my artist statement with this. And because I'm using return minimal, I get only HTTP headers back. I get a 200-ish, Eric. So I have now updated my artist statement with a regular sort of the equivalent of a set field, right, instead of a script parameter payload. So accomplishing the same thing two different ways. Creating a record, very, very simple to do. All you need to do is, this is sort of like the data API as well. You only need to pass in the field names and values for the things that you want to set. You don't need to send anything else. So if all you're updating is an address, that's all you send in the payload. So we're going to create a new record for Vincent Vega in the artist table. And in this case, I left the prefer return minimal off, so I get back the entire artist record here in this case, which for Vincent Vega, he's only got a name assigned, right? I didn't have to worry about returning an image or some base 64 encoded stuff. So in comparison to the data API, when you go to make a new record with the data API, all you get back is the ID, which tells you that it worked, but if you probably want to do something with that record that you've just created. I mean, that's not uncommon. But in the data API, you've got to make another request with that ID. With the OData, if you want to just see the record that you created and to continue on with it and show it in a UI or something like that, then you can just get back the entire record, which is kind of nice. Okay, batches. This is our rescue dog. So just the name of the database / $batch. Again, that's like dollar value. It's not a placeholder. It's a literal argument that you put in there. The content type for a batch is multi-part mixed. And then you'll see boundary equals boundary. The first boundary is the actual, sort of the name of the variable, if you will. The second boundary is that's just what I called it. It's sort of a programmer thing to not use different names for stuff like that. So you'll see the body looks like this. So it's not that difficult, really, to look at. You've got an opening boundary tag, you've got a closing boundary tag, and you've got a boundary tag again in the middle that's separating the first request from the second request. And so this is just like doing a regular API call to update a record. We pass in the name of the table, some kind of key or identifier for that record. It's JSON. The content length here, this is where you get tripped up, one of the places where you might get tripped up trying to create a batch. The content length is the exact number of characters, including the brackets, for the JSON payload. I'm just setting an isHidden field to true. If your content length is wrong, the entire payload is invalid. So probably need to use some kind of a length function or count those characters when you're building up your response. In this case, I'm just setting isHidden to true for these two different artist records. You're probably going to have different payloads, so super important to make sure the content length is accurate for each of the operations. And you can combine these. They don't need to just be updates like they are here. You could have some delete operations, some new record operations, and some patches even, all kind of bundled together in one request. Over in the ArcCon database, I'm going to go to this sort of table view of artists. Sort this up, yeah. So I'll zoom in a little bit on this. That'll probably help. So these are the artists that were participating in the very last ArtCon event before COVID took everything down. I've just sorted this in a way where my artist record is up at the top, and then one of our artists, Paxton Maroney, up here. And those two records are these two IDs. I've done mine so many times, 1,200 modifications. I know my ID pretty much by memory at this point. This is Paxton's ID for her record. And so what I'm going to do is right now is hidden is just empty. That was a flag that I used to use in the iOS app to determine, to sort of hotfix which artists would appear or not appear in the app. There were lots of things like that in the iOS app. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to fire this request. And it looks like almost nothing changed, but we get back a 204, so 200. That's all we're sort of interested in, really. We have affected rows 1, affected rows 1 for the second request. So the response looks a little bit like you kind of have to blink a couple times to see that it actually worked, because the response looks so much like the payload. But back over here in the artist table, I have now set 2 records is hidden to true. So a batch could have, I don't get carried away, probably a few dozen maybe. It's not really intended to do really, really large sets of operations. You'll eventually at some point it's going to break down. I mean, you're probably not going to be setting to one field for a bunch of records. You're probably going to be passing multiple things in. And so you want to keep the number of operations kind of down. You can group batches, so like batches and batches almost. But it's not intended to do like, you're not going to sync a whole database. There's something else. It's more for, like, say, a shopping cart items, or a picker or a chooser or something like that. But they are handy if you want to just fire off a few operations all at once. I'm going to skip deleting records because we're going to run out of time otherwise. You just pass in the ID for the record that you want to delete, and you don't get anything back, so that's kind of boring, nothing to show there. CRUD operations. So so what do we have currently? So these are the tables in the ArtCon database. Not going to read them off. Just know that they start with albums and it ends with zip codes. That will be enough for the example. What I'm going to do here is I'm calling our FileMaker underscore tables sort of endpoint. And for the body, what I need to do is I need to include table name, of course, for creating a table, and then optionally any fields that we want to add to that table. You don't have to do fields at all. You can do them later. But at the very least, you need table name. And so I'm just going to create a table called some new table. Super exciting. I'm going to include a field in that new table called some new field. That field is going to be of type number, and decimal is the way you notate that in OData. So fire this. Looks like nothing happened. Do you think it happened? Let's take a look. We have some new table in our schema now. In our some new table, we have some new field, and it is a number because we told it it's a decimal. If we look at the field options, this says unique. Anybody catch why that would be the case? Over in my requests, I did this on purpose. Primary true. So if I change that to false, then it wouldn't show up. It wouldn't tick that box in the field options. So that's how you do anything unique. And that can be, as a reminder, anything that's marked unique can serve as a key for a request in OData calls. So we have, now we're going to add another field, some other field, to our some other table. And in this case, we're calling FileMaker tables again. This time we pass in the name of the table because we're just adding a field only. It's just a fields array this time. I'm going to fire that. And the response that you get back this time, this is sort of like not using return minimal. you get back as the response the name of the table and all of the fields in that table, including the one we just did, which is this guy here. So let's go take a look in here. Our tables, some new table, some new field, which we did in the previous request, and then we have some other field, which is text, because of that type, varchar. So now we're going to delete a field. In this case, there's no body because we're getting rid of it. So FileMaker tables, the name of the table, you're going to operate on the name of the field you want to get rid of. So it's not in the payload, it's in the URL. And I'm going to fire that, 200-ish response. And our some other field is gone now. So now we're going to delete a table. So if you're feeling a little anxious about it, hold somebody near you, hold their hand, stroke their hair maybe, and just, it's going to be okay. So we're going to delete a table. All you need is the name of the table. So it's not even a complicated request even. It's too easy to get rid of stuff. So we're going to delete this some new table now. No payload, no parameters. 200. And it did not survive. It's gone. It's dead. Hopefully you have a backup of that. Be careful with these. Webhooks. This and MCP will be and we'll wrap up. So webhooks are great. We've had them in Claris Connect, but this is OData. We're not doing a Claris Connect session. So name of the database. Name of the database / webhook dot, and then the operator or function is get all. And that's all you need to add to that. And this will give you back all of the webhooks that currently reside on your FileMaker server. There are already 3 here. Anthony surprised me with this yesterday during the rehearsal because I didn't expect these to be here. But what these are is for the next example. So for Kafka, we're writing, after a record gets modified, we're sending all the fields for that record to Kafka, which is then writing those record changes to a SQL database. And so it's probably good practice, if you're the guy writing the webhooks and responsible for that data getting from one place to the other, you need to ensure that nothing's been changed along the way. You don't want people changing field names or names of tables and then all your webhooks break. So that's a good example of when to use these stable identifiers for your fields. So I don't know, a few dozen fields. For the event artist, event artist has a webhook, the events table has a webhook, and the artist table has a webhook. You'll see the Kafka result in a moment. What we're going to do is create a new webhook. This URL, Starsite, is just I was a freelancer for 10 years in a previous life, so Starsite was just sort of my name. And so what I needed to do is, in order to sort of test a webhook without just going to the database and see if it worked or not, you want to probably catch the webhook result at some kind of endpoint, and then so you can inspect it and see if everything's kind of working the way you intended to before you start writing actual records to production databases. And so this is just the endpoint that I stood up with a service called ngrok. I think we have a link for it at the end of the presentation. Everything's JSON for webhooks. This is the artist table that I'm interested in sort of monitoring. So what this webhook says is that any artist record that gets updated, I want to fire a webhook and return the name, the address, and the UUID. I don't have a filter in this particular webhook. I could filter it down to records of a certain category or type. So in this case, since there's no filter, it would be literally every operation, any modification. And so these are the 3 fields that I'm going to return. I'm going to create this webhook with webhook.add. And our data API-ish response, we get back the ID of the webhook that we just created. So if I fire the get all again, these are the Kafka webhooks, and then down here at the bottom is the one we just made. So now this webhook is living on the FileMaker server, and it's going to send any responses to this ngrok service that I stood up. So I am going to go to my artist record. And so supposedly this webhook is just alive waiting for something to happen, right? So let's just go ahead and I'm going to change the address. To something different to trigger a record modification, and nothing happened that I can tell anyway. And so how would we check that? I'm going to light up this ngrok service. That's all I'm doing here. Don't worry about this. So that's running. I'm going to go over to our ngrok service. That's where I've directed all the webhooks to be sent so I can catch them. And we wait a moment. I won't wait forever, but sometimes these happen before I even get to the window. Good point. I don't know if that'll count as a modification. I think it will. There we go. Ta-da. So we've got a webhook. It's landed at ngrok. I can look at that. I can get my headers. But what I'm kind of interested in as far as testing goes is I want the response. So I'm going to copy this response. Sorry, I'm switching to a lot of apps. Apologize. It's sort of the only way to really do this effectively. I'm going to paste that response into a JSON viewer. I'm going to nuke this headers because I don't really care about those. I want to show you the webhook payload. So this is what got sent to that service, which would eventually is what would be sent to like a production table. So I've sent a new name, a new address, and a UUID for that. And then this is the sort of the operation, the equivalent operation if you were just doing a regular OData query. So our webhooks are working. I'm not going to really go through. You can interrogate webhooks by ID. You can invoke them by ID, like in Rapid API. But it was more fun to just do an example instead of just doing the invoke call. Deleting, same thing. You just pass in the ID of the webhook you want to delete, and it's gone. So I'm not going to spend any time on that. MCP. This is the last thing that we're going to do here as far as demos. So I'm not going to do that in Rapid API. So another app switch. So. Yep, that's right. Thank you. So Anthony also spun up, one less, there we go. Spun up this MCP server for us with Matt's help, and we've got Kafka catching webhooks and writing those records to a MySQL database. LibreChat is using, I've got it set to use Opus 4.6. And so we don't know anything about this MCP tool, so let's just say what tools are available. See what we are even able to do. And so our MCP server says, hey, looks like I've got some basic CRUD operations. You sort of get those for free. You don't really have to create those per se. You sort of get them. And so for each table, I can do these things, these CRUD operations. But at the end here, it also sees that there's a script available called getLastAuctionPrice. And we've defined that and exposed it as a tool call to the MCP. So in addition to just sort of regular boilerplate CRUD operations, it also knows it can do something called getLastAuctionPrice. So I'm going to say, I'm Paxton Maroney. At the last auction, how much did my piece sell for? Bad grammar, not going to worry about it. We're chatting with a model, right? It's not code, so you can be casual with it if you want. And it knows about the script now, so it's going to try to use that script in an effort to give us what we asked for. So Paxton Maroney, your noontide piece, digital photography, sold for $1,500. You were in the first auction, 17th position. You were on the left side of the venue. And that is our MCP call. There's OData happening underneath. So that's sort of what this is here. You've got what looks like an OData result, except it's a script result in this case, right? Remember, the script is returning, as its exit, it's returning JSON. And so that JSON gets passed into Claude Opus, basically. And so it mashes that all together and gives us something a little nicer to read than that. But the OData stuff is under the hood. It's still happening, though. It's still there. And as a bonus, this is, that's a little bit bigger, that's good enough. This is a MySQL database that we have Kafka set up on. And so in addition to firing the webhook, we're also sending it to Kafka, which is then writing those records. And we have our new artist statement. We've got our updated address for my artist record. And so I just returned a couple of records just to show you that that actually, in fact, works. So the webhook can be, you could sync that to another file, but it can go outside. You can send it anywhere you want. So I just wanted to show you that as sort of a bonus demo. So OData is super powerful. There's a lot of ways to use it, way more than the data API or the old PHP API, anything like that that you guys are maybe familiar with. And it looks like from our survey, most of y'all are still on data API. So our third question was, how do you primarily utilize OData for your solutions? Half of you don't. That makes me sad. MCP server connectivity, which is what you just saw actually. So kudos to y'all. FileMaker to FileMaker, again, like I mentioned, don't have to write to SQL. You could write it to another FileMaker, a sync table. And then integration of external systems, a little bit of a sort of a grab bag of things probably included in that. So thank you for filling that out. We appreciate it. All right, so that was a lot. And we made it, I think. Now you're all OData wizards. We might gather up a collection of these requests from Rapid API and distribute those collections for Rapid API and Postman, probably. So keep an eye out for that. And like I mentioned, OData is everywhere. It's in unexpected places like Claris Connect, MCP, webhooks. It's going to displace the data API, so all you data API users should probably take note of that at some point. It's not imminent, but it will happen at some point. So if you're not already comfortable with OData or haven't implemented it in your solutions yet, book some quality time with it. Take it to dinner. Make it Facebook official. So that was a close-up look at what's available today. Maybe we'll get some new features in the upcoming FileMaker release. If there's enough OData stuff, we'll probably cover it for you in a future FMPug. Maybe one of those things will be JSON batches. I hope. Pray. Putting it out into the world, into the universe. So hopefully Claris is listening. JSON batches, for the love of God, please. Thank you. Some OData resources. You can probably rip through that in about 5 seconds. Claris community, Claris docs. The Oasis site has the official full-blown OData spec, which is not what Claris supports, a subset of that, right? But the full spec, if you're interested, is at the Oasis site. Some of the apps you saw me use today. And a much-deserved shout-out to my friend, John Renfrew, who might be watching. OData OG. So hopefully I did you proud. So I think we're going to do Q&A.
We are going to do Q&A.
We have time for Q&A?
Yes, sir. I've got 4 quick questions and one that I'll talk to you later. We'll look at that.
Yeah.
When using, calling a script and using the script parameter value key, if the script parameter that you want to pass in is a JSON object, does the value of that key in your request need to be a quoted string of the JSON object, or can it be a nested JSON object?
Eric with the excellent questions.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't tried that. My suspicion is that it would need to be quoted.
Okay. Next, when asking for related data without the cross join, and how does OData know which keys to use to join between the enumerated tables?
That, I think, I will double check this, but I believe that might need a graph, a TO, like connection, because you're not including a filter, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
The whole relationship is written out, so it's going to expect a TO of that name.
Gotcha. Okay.
Probably should have called that out. Thank you.
Final two questions around batch operations.
Yep.
Does the whole batch work like a transaction, such that if one of those things fails, they all fail and all get rolled back?
It can. Doesn't have to. The example I showed was just a simple boundary, right? At the top and the bottom. Within that boundary sort of level, you can add if it's batch or a transaction, there's another key that you can add.
Okay.
That identifies a group of things within the overall batch. And if you define it that way, then that's sort of atomic. So if one of them fails, they all fail.
So
They're all required.
It's not it doesn't by default work like a transaction, but you can add in more tags to make it work.
Right. There's an additional tag
And
inside
then,
that.
given the white space requirements in the batch, is it required then for the JSON payload that you will put in each batch item to not be JSON formatted? Right? In other words, that it's a single string, no return characters, basically don't do JSON formatted elements and then put it in your batch. Is that true or?
I've only sent JSON payloads. I want to say that that's all you would be able to send. That's the only way I've done it.
Yeah.
Put it that way. It's probably worth trying though, because it is white space. It's not application JSON payload.
Right, because if
Right.
you send in the JSON object,
So it might
that
take other
that had
functions.
return characters and tabs and was all readable,
Right.
like, would that break the back?
Right. I'm going to switch out of this real quick because I forgot to show something that will help you. I told you I would help you, and I'm not helping you. This is the FileMaker calc that I end up finally arrived at in order to get a batch payload to actually work and be valid. So in this case, it's a while loop. I was looping over just two artist records to the batch that I did. Each iteration, I grab the ID because I need that for the operation. Each JSON in the iteration, I set to is hidden as true for both of them, but it conceivably would be something dynamic that you would build here. And then for the block, the text of the payload for that operation, it's got its own boundary. It's got the ID, which is not the record ID, it's just sort of the internal ID for the batch. The operation itself, what record it's operating on, content length. I just ended up using the length function for this JSON, whichever it is. So each iteration, the content length will be whatever it is. So it won't ever be wrong. And then I'm just appending that to the results, and I make a list. I end that result with the closing boundary tag. And then most importantly, some of you may have done this for other reasons that aren't batches, because that payload looks really easy. It looks super easy to construct. It's just, I had an extra return here, I had an extra return there. Those aren't returns. It's a carriage return line feed. And so what you need to do is this part here builds it up the way you saw it. It would look exactly the same if I didn't do the substitute, but it wouldn't be a valid payload. So in replacing, at the end of all that, I replaced the pilcrows with a carriage return line feed, which is what makes the payload valid. It doesn't change the way it looks, but it will absolutely it will just fail otherwise. So this while is what I sort of settled on to help make it easier for me to dynamically make a payload that wasn't going to fail every time. Yes.
And that works great, long as you stick with SD characters, but if you get into 2-bit characters, sometimes I had to do some additional things to figure out the length to be correct.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah.
So sometimes I'll just fill.
Yeah, if we just got JSON batches, we wouldn't have to contend with her. So
It'd be nice if they were to function than to do that horizontal.
Yeah, wouldn't it? Yeah. So I forgot to point that out earlier. Thanks for reminding me. So I can post that calc someplace later if you want.
You said there's a record limit. I have a custom 2 million record problem that you could probably solve.
2 million. Okay.
It's a secure database. Does that have to go out into the ether?
Or can it all be done
Securely on-prem?
So in our case, when we were taking the records from our Archon demo and moving them over to MySQL, that is a service that's running in a Docker container in our server in the room in there, along with FileMaker server is local here. The Kafka is running in a container local here, and the MySQL database is running in a container local here. So it all stays local. You don't need to use an internet-based service to do it like we did it.
Right.
A lot of times on really heavy lifting for Kafka, you either need a Zerowait server or you need something in the cloud that's got the horsepower. But yeah, that is you don't need to be in the cloud to run a Kafka.
Brian said there was a record, 2 million records, 2 million.
Well, run a bench.
Yeah, definitely for a bench, for sure.
Yeah, but you wouldn't need to run a batch. What you'd want to do is synchronize those tables.
Right.
And you could potentially even call your FileMaker table and just query your archive table if that's the purpose of having that many records.
We had an internal project for a client here a few months ago where we needed to build an off-site app that synced from a hosted FileMaker system to like an iPad or a laptop out in the field. And they needed to be able to work offline. And so we needed to use the row mod ID for all the collisions I mentioned. But more importantly, we had something like 80,000 records that we had to fetch that were required by the end user before they could sort of do any other operations and then make their changes and then push those changes back to the hosted file. We first tried the data API, which just abysmally failed under that load. It was just too much. It timed out before it could give us a response. Then we went to OData, and one of the reasons we went to OData is because OData can return XML. And so what that let us do was instead of waiting for 80,000 objects to come back in a response and then try to parse that in FileMaker to make records out of them, we took that XML and we sent it to a text field in FileMaker. And then once it was there on the local hosted version, we ran an import script that imported the XML with a style sheet to make the new records or to modify the existing records. So instead of trying to use a FileMaker script to iterate over 80,000 object JSON, good luck with that. The XML is a lifesaver, and it's only going to be in OData. So we haven't gone to 2 million records, but
that was a pre-Kafka.
That was.
Yeah.
So we were into the low 6 digits, probably for that. And it's reliable at that scale, but 2 million, somewhere along the line, that's going to probably need to be architected in a different way. Instead of just sort of running examples like I was showing for sure. I think the timeout for OData, I believe, is 5 minutes. Do you remember, Eric? I think it's 5. Can't remember. 5 or 6 minutes. And then if the response isn't ready yet, your OData request will time out. So, anybody else?
So there's some questions posted here.
No.
These were asked live in the YouTube chat and then restated by me. So you can.
I see.
Starting with the last one, I think, because it kind of riffed on the same issue.
Right.
Because I think when we're talking about large tables, it depends on what you mean, right? If FileMaker is never going to be a great tool if what you're trying to do is full 2 million records in a response, right? But FileMaker not the right tool for that, period. That's why you might use Kafka to also push some of that data or the key columns of that data into something like a MySQL or something that is just going to have no
Can handle that.
blazing
2
2 million records out.
Right.
But interacting with a 2 million record table that's in FileMaker with OData, add a record, read a subset of records, I think OData is great for that. And to what I think I understand this question means, should I use OData or DAPI? I think what we've found is that OData is somewhat to a lot more performant than DAPI with large tables. That's my perception.
Well, and it's filter options and select and just the ability to within a query curate what you're asking for is not just more performant, but that feature set alone allows you to kind of get down to here's what I really want. I don't really want everything.
Yeah,
I don't even really want most of the things so I can decide what I want. Here's exactly what I want.
More performant to run. It's certainly more performant to parse. It's less complicated to parse if you're fetching a bunch of related records. But the select parameter is a lifesaver because with DAPI, if you want just a handful of handful of fields back, you've got to make a brand new layout, new table occurrence. It's kind of a hassle. It works, but it clutters up your graph. And so with OData, you just use a select parameter, and then you can say, just give me these fields back. And you don't have to worry about graphs or relationships or any of that stuff.
And I think the follow-up question here would definitely in design. Just repeat why we used XML. It wasn't necessarily that it was better per se. I think it was because we could do a direct import.
Right. Well, we used the import script.
And we wanted it to work offline.
Right.
And so because of that, if you used XML, stuck it in a field, you could do other internal things with it.
We tried originally with batches, and it just wasn't, A, performant, and B, the idea that, well, maybe it got part of the way through and then it failed. Well, what state is everything in now? I don't know. It wasn't reliable that way. And so we sent all of the XML back all at the same time and wrote to a text field. And once it was on the host, it's safe, and now we can parse it. It's way faster to do that local. And it sort of counts as a transaction or a log of what happened, what got sent on the last sync. So we had sort of a record of that even, which is kind of nice. Yes, sir.
But I heard a discussion with some of the
Various
developer guys that there's your commitment that going forward is going to be OData more than the DAPI, the focus on that. And then the comment was, it would be used for new feature sets. Mostly they're looking at AI, but other things. And another interesting comment that was mentioned at the time was that, well, maybe it might be something that would substitute for in a new version of ESS that would use OData. And
I wasn't sure if I should stray into that or how far,
anyway,
how much of it was out there, but yeah.
that would
It's going to be more places than you think.
so I'm excited. I'll enjoy it.
ODBC, some of that stuff probably get gutted or go away or just change. We've got Studio now. It's going to be everywhere. DAPI it's proprietary. It only works with FileMaker, and ODBC and all this other stuff that we've been talking about is outside of that environment. So I mean, trying to force DAPI to work with 8 other external services reliably is. I'm glad they went with OData, something that's been around for a long, long time. It's all enterprise level stuff and works everywhere. So, and they didn't have to build from scratch. So.
So someone had previously asked if I create and then delete a temp table, what are the impacts on the file size and stability? I mean, the issue there is just how big is the starter file that you're working with? Does it have a table of 2 million records? I don't think you would want to take that 2 million record table and create a temp table with all of that data. But if you do want to take a subset of that data and query it quickly and play with it or manipulate it, that's the perfect example of where you would create that temp table and basically move that data over, the curated data over, and run some operations on it and do your work there instead of against a table so large. Especially in the realm of like, are there unstored calcs or things like that? A lot of container fields that just really slow down a basic query. That's kind of where it shines. So obviously, if you're moving over 100,000 records out of a 2 million record table, that's going to take your file size up and down. But I haven't noticed it, and I haven't really done anything that big. But I haven't really noticed it be a situation where everyone's groaning and waiting for this thing to finish. But I've played with it with, maybe the hundreds to thousands of records set. I maybe the crew man could play with your table for a while. See what they're so yeah.
I can so I was actually the one that asked that. And related question on that I just now thought of with your answer because maybe if I'm building my temp table, okay, I don't put it in my giant legacy 86 gigabyte file that's got my entire company's history of data in it. Yeah. Right? I put it in a lightweight, more throwaway file. That kind of gets to cross joins though. So can we with OData do a cross join between two different FileMaker files? Or do we have to kind of get the data into a single file? Do we know?
Try the living test. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly with MCP,
Yeah.
you know, pull it and then let the
Yellow and start.
Right. Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. That is an interesting use case. I kind of want to play with that.
Yeah.
Right. All right.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for attention. We can just out loud. From that QR code, we'd love to know what you think about our FMPug topics. Helps us steer the ship in the right direction for content you guys actually care about, and kind of gives us a good way to make this a product you guys are more happy to consume.
I think that's it.
That's this.